Today we're going to be talking about magical entities and our respective experiences as well as some myths around entities.
Maybe.
Maybe. Okay, what did you have in mind?
That was the topic that we chose about an hour ago. And I started thinking and pondering and kind of cross multiplying all of the different things that we're doing. And what I hit on, which I'm totally springing on you and everyone, I'm sorry, is this idea. So we are offering the creation challenge at the end of the month.
Entity craft.
Entity craft, yes. And we've been preparing for that. And the first thing that we kind of look at is what happens when we create entities that we didn't know that we did, or what entities are we already in relation with that we might not have acknowledged or were not aware of. And then that got me thinking about some of the hidden harvest work that we've done and just, communal entities and energy that are in all of our lives. And that led me to sex magic and porn and the unintended entities that we make. So that's kind of where I want to steer our conversation today, just because it feels very alive and I'm curious.
All right, well then let's do it. And welcome Odor, Sierra as well. And folks, if you have questions as we're doing this or comments, feel free to chime in. So, all right, well then why don't you lead us here in this conversation, Sheena?
Oh, I will do my best. So I would like to kind of frame the conversation by saying that my background is in somatic trauma therapy and in specifically in sexual shadow integration. So when we're talking about things like porn, there's like absolutely no judgment. There's no shame. It's just a expression of energy, both personal and collective, and it can really inform a lot of our experiences, our magical practices. So we're kind of looking at it from this perspective of how do we interact with it and what maybe are some of the things to be aware of, especially if we're already practicing sex magic. So Taylor, can you just give us like a really quick overview on what sex magic is?
Okay. Well, there's different flavors of sex magic for one thing, but
Mhm.
like sex magic is really the combination of the erotic, sexual, creative energy that is within all of us with the application of magic. And it can happen with vanilla sex, it can happen with kinky sex, it can happen with all kinds of shades and experiences of sex and sensuality. And to be clear, when we talk about the word sex, we're not even just talking about the act of penetration, which is so often what most people think of as sex, because sex can be it can be so much more than just that particular act. So when we look at sex magic, we're really looking at the entire encompassment of both human sensuality and sexuality as it's expressed through the deliberate choice to quote unquote have sex with somebody.
Beautiful. That's a great definition. And I think that, when we're just looking at like basic magic, we are looking at the raising, direction, and release of our energy, whether that's through creativity, through sex, through basically anything where we're creating something. So Taylor's been doing a lot of kind of these explorations about porn on his other Substack, Sovereign Submission, and it's been leading to lots of really interesting conversations. And what my curiosity is around is for those of us who do practice sex magic in whatever form we do, how is that influenced by porn and the entities or the energies that we might be either creating or feeding without really realizing it, whether we're in sexual ritual or not, and just having that release of sexual energy. Um, yeah, I would love to know your thoughts on it.
Hmm. Yeah, kind of it brings to mind the mythos of the incubus and the succubus. The succubus is basically the female demon who tempts men to get them to spill their seed. And the incubus is the masculine version of that. And the idea really is that they are draining the vital life force out. So think about like pornography that what stands out to me about pornography, and I say this from my own experiences around porn, but also from just sitting in space with other men and hearing them talk about it, is that pornography is essentially a parasitical viral entity in a lot of ways that is designed to get us to consume and to waste our creative energies and presence through the fantasized versions of sex. And from a magical perspective, it's really a way to significantly drain the creative energies of people so that they become more compliant and docile within the world around them. So there's a very, and it's interesting because like if we look at the whole debate around sex and how sex is framed, sex is treated as taboo. Like if you go on to Meta, i.e. Facebook or Instagram or anything like that, you can't really use the word sex in there or you'll get shadow banned. You have to like for example, a friend of mine, Ian, he does a sexual reset program and some other things. But one of the things he ends up talking about, like he'll put in the word like SEGG or other things along those lines, and we all know what he's saying and what it is. But the reason it's happening is because, like in a very real sense, sex has been made into a taboo, and that actually makes porn more appealing and attractive. So I think there's a very purposeful construction around that in a lot of ways, because then it's a way to basically make the masses more docile. And from a magical perspective, that's a really potent approach to doing things. It's not something I really advocate for. I think it's black magic in the sense of the word, like, this is like not good magic at all. And it's really fascinating to see that come into play because of the way it shapes our experiences around our own sexuality, and and yes, even in a real sense, like the entities that we create. Because a lot of times if we're looking at porn, what we're looking at is an idealized version of the lover, right? This person that basically fulfills our fantasies, sometimes also our sexual wounding. What are your thoughts on this? And your experiences as a woman who, you know, has the background that you have and everything that you've explored and seen.
Yeah, I think there's definitely that aspect of like numbing out and taking away our creativity and our eroticism. And one of the things that I've been like really curious about in this is the the unintentional release. You know, what is that feeding from a collective level when you're engaging? And there's such a spectrum between like hardcore BDSM to your mommy reads of shape shifting romance. Like there's such a wide variety. But anytime we're engaging with any of these um, different this whole spectrum of media, we are directing our consciousness, our attention, our magical flow, and sometimes our erotic energy very directly. So it's this kind of this unintentional energy that we're putting out into the world. So I think it's very valuable in looking at what is it? And again, not with like judgment or shame, but going where and how are we releasing our energies? I think we do create things very unconsciously, so there's the two aspects of it that I guess I want to separate is like the unintentional creation when we're engaging in sex magic, or we just have the habit of using sex magic. So that pattern is kind of there, even if we're not directing it towards something specific of ours. There's the question of kind of like, what is it going to? And what are we unintentionally creating? And then what are we unintentionally feeding? So I'm curious if you have any thoughts on like the distinction or.
Mm. I think it's really interesting because like there's the aspect of addiction for one thing. Like people that watch porn basically get addicted to it. They get addicted to the dopamine rush. They get addicted to the thing, and it even gets to the point where somebody who's like a porn addict will find that they have to watch more and more extreme acts of sex in order to get off, because basically what's happening is, and stuff that they wouldn't even really be interested in, just because they need more novelty, more excitement, something different. So in a very real sense, it's something that's designed like as a funnel to lead that in. So there's that aspect to it. And I think it's really important because really what we're doing is if we look at a magical entity, how do we feed magical entities? How do we fuel them? Well, that's one of the questions that we look at in terms of consciously creating an entity, but an unconscious creation, that same principle's at work. So if we're caught up in something like that and there's that sexual energy going in, that's feeding it. But it's not even just the sexual energy, it's also the emotional energy. The desire for companionship, the loneliness that somebody feels, the structuring of lust and want and longing and all those other things can play a very important role in the way that we experience the world. And I think it's really important to acknowledge and understand that as a way of being able to develop a nuanced awareness of how sexual magic works and how entities work, but also how like something like porn can hijack that and take from us a lot of the agency. And this is like where the challenge is for somebody, because what we're interacting with, we're not just interacting with something that's visual. Um, we're also interacting with the energy that we've put into it and the essence that we've put into it that's created this entity that in a very unconscious way is, for us at least, is acting upon us as a way to continually feed itself. I think that like, the challenge with any form of addiction, whether it's alcohol, porn, or anything like that, and like from a perspective of like the entity, is that we're not just changing the behavior, we're also detaching ourselves from the entity, and we're making sure that we energetically do not reattach to it and give it life. So in a very real sense, we're dealing with a thought form or a tulpa that's taken on a life of its own, but not in a way that we've consciously consented to. And welcome, Noctua. Glad to have you here as well.
Yes, and if anybody has any like questions or curiosities or experiences that they want to share, we would love to have you as part of the conversation.
Yep. You all know me well enough by now to know I welcome comments and stuff, and I think it's fun when we have that. Whether we're doing interviews or talking with each other or anything like that, it's fun.
So, how do we? Oh no, new question coming in. From a magical perspective or even like a process perspective, do you feel like there's any difference between like interacting through like writing or through visually? Or like through reading or through like imagination where we actually have to imagine the scene, or if we're watching it, if there's any kind of difference from a magical perspective?
Hmm. Well, let's put it this way: I found that even as a kid, and I got into porn. I got into porn like as a teenager, which yeah, unfortunately, um, and it was mostly VHS tapes and magazines.
Mhm.
But most of the magazines still had images. They did have stories as well. I think the written word can be very salacious and captivating in its own way. But I find that I would have to say, from my own experience and just again observing what other people have shared as well, that in a very real sense, the visual is more engaging. At least for men, there is that saying that men are visual creatures, right? Well, there's that may be part of it, but I think that the visual is more engaging because it also creates an immersive experience, or at least it pretends to. we're even seeing that now with like AI chatbots. Like I saw a thing the other day on another Substack where he was commenting on like he was scrolling on Facebook and he happened to see like an AI chatbot that was like that represented like that was basically a porn AI where she was like, hey, like you can have me with my appearance and everything else and a soaked pussy without any of the attitude or anything like that. And he was just like, I'm scared for 14-year-old boys. And I don't blame him. Like I would be too. And I share that. I mean, I share that because it's a great example of like how like this particular industry is in a very real sense evolving its practices to also capture and engage the attention. And again, it's a good example of how insidious this kind of thing can be. What are
So
your
what's
thoughts
the
on it?
what's the magical layer on top of it?
Well, the magical layer on top of that would be again the capturing of the life force, the creative force, the capturing of the imagination. If somebody's consuming, they're not creating. And if they're not creating them, then what they're really not doing is they're not having an impact on the world around them. And so in a very real sense, it's kind of like, well, whose interest is that in from a magical perspective? Whose whose interest is that in? Well, that's going to be in the interest of people who want to create a very specific narrative in the world and want to capture that life energy and funnel it and direct it in ways that are supportive of their agenda and agency. And I think we certainly see that in world events right now.
So if
What are your thoughts on some of these questions? Because I want to hear your thoughts. Like before you go any further, let's hear your thoughts here. You're asking me these questions, but I think I'm curious as to what Sheena thinks.
I agree with you, and it's really interesting because like the energetic level, all of that. But I hadn't actually really thought of like because what was kind of like um rolling around in my brain this morning was like, well, sex magic is a very valid way of creating entities, right? Because it is such a burst of life force attention, intention. So how like we know the opposite side of it and the effects that porn has on all of these different levels. So I think, and as a part of like taking back our agency, taking back our control, if we want to be doing um sex magic as that kind of introductory way of creating and or working with entities, what do we have to know?
Mm. First, I just want to note Noctua's comment of archons. Yeah, kind of the Gnostic archons. What I was talking about earlier. Um, I think that one of the things that we really have to know is like I've done sex magic with spirits before, with deities and spirits and things along those lines. And so I think like what we have to really know is like what is the intention? What is the consciousness that is going into this? What is the choice that I'm making? Am I making this from agency or not? And for example, like I have a relationship with the goddess Aphrodite. Well, that's a pretty important relationship in and of itself that plays a role in how in my interaction with the erotic and and the sexual energies. I also have a relationship with Eros, who is the Greek god of movement. And again, Eros, eroticism. There's a very deliberate relationship there. And one of the things that I've necessarily had to explore in some ways is the shadow aspect of that in my own life. I'm exploring that even now. I recently, as you know, but other people will know, I joined a 6-month cohort where the focus is for men. The focus is on puberty, pornography, and masculinity, and kind of looking at the intersection of puberty and pornography and how that's shaped our experiences of masculinity. Well, I think, when we look at like sex magic and the creation of entities and things like that, we kind of have to look like what's the baggage, first of all, that I'm bringing in?
Mhm.
What's the cultural baggage, but what's also my own respective baggage with that? If I'm going to use sex magic, am I using sex magic as a way to basically get off on fantasies? Am I using this in a reverent way? Am I using it in a way where I'm like, like there's the I'm exploring the creative potential, or am I just getting caught up in the consumption? And believe it or not, I do think that there are certain trends, even like in the sex magic aspects, that kind of that focus more on the consumptive as opposed to the creator. So it's really important to recognize that. And then I think like in terms of creating entities, it's kind of the same thing. Like, what do I really want to be creating? Do I want to be creating something where what I'm creating is basically perpetuating the cycle of consumption in my own life? That's basically what is happening with pornography, with getting engaged in that. Or do I want to create something that actually brings a deeper sense of depth and experience and lived reality into what I'm doing?
Mm. Yeah, I think those are very valuable just in general life questions too.
They are, and they're not asked often enough. And so I'd put out to our audience that is here with us live, like, what are your thoughts? Is there anything that lands with you in what I just shared, or that Sheena's just shared? Because this is part of what I think we explore, like, in general. It's not just about like, oh, we're gonna do magic to get results. I mean, that's important. But also, like, how does magic contribute to our overall lived experience? What is it that we are doing with this practice, and how does it shape our lives, and how are we shaping it? I mean, that's where these questions really go into war.
Yeah. So I guess that hmm, I'm just kind of digesting and letting everything like, oh man, okay.
I have a question for you, Sheena.
Shoot.
What is your lived experience around sex magic, pornography, and entities? And how's that informed your approach to sexual trauma work with other people, but also just in regards to like exploring and working with magical entities?
I mean, we made some mistakes along the way for sure. um, I think part of that is like we're we're also like magicians at that edge of the personal and the collective. And having that relationship with both, like what is the personal experience? And then also, again, even if we're having a personal experience, we're also feeding a collective. So it becomes really interesting to kind of tease that apart, especially kind of in our current climate of um, everything that's happening as far as looking at the industries of pornography and sex slavery and everything that's happening right now. I think that it's my personal experience is, I think everybody has learned from porn in some sort of way. Um, I don't know anyone who hasn't. And so there's always that internal experience. And there's also, it's just so much, right? I think that that's the part that's kind of missing from the current conversation is we try to create change or say you shouldn't do that or because, like we instill shame. I think that that's the biggest number one thing I work with clients both like from a trauma perspective and magically is like untying the shame so you can actually see what's underneath it and whether or not something is working for you or you want to be doing something differently or adjust how you're interacting with all of these mediums. It could be alcohol, it could be porn, it could be social media. Um, and I think everyone struggles with it at some point or another, which is why I really love these conversations. Um,
I would agree with that. I mean, I've certainly struggled with it. and and had my challenges around it, and not just like with pornography. I've had stuff come out in other ways, like with sexual stuff, and it's part of the journey that I'm involved in, like with my own men's work journey and my own inner journey, but also just the work that I do with men. And it's also partially, I think, what informs my approach to working with entities. Like, one of the things that, I talk about in with the work around magical entities is purposely choosing to create collaborative and conscious relationships, because most of what I see out there around entity work is either, okay, we're going to create a servant, or we're going to create something and it's going to turn on us at some point, and we're going to have to destroy it or get rid of it. And I think part of that is born out of this very real experience of the unconscious power dynamics that show up when we're in connection with an entity through a medium such as pornography or alcohol or entheogens or anything else, where it's abused and used in a way that ultimately corrupts the very force and being of what is being consumed.
Mhm. And I think it's a valuable exploration because as magicians, we have more power to create change and agency. We aren't just looking at things as like isolated events or like everything in separation. We're always looking at, what is the chain, both seen and unseen, that is creating the reality that we're in. Because what we want to be doing is applying conscious attention and intention to create change within those bigger patterns. So you can't really be a magician without talking about sovereignty, without talking about how we are um, making change. We also don't have that plausible deniability of, oh, like, I don't have any effect on it, right?
Well, the thing is we're always in a relationship of some sort.
Hmm.
I think that that's a really important component with all of this. Like, we're always in a relationship. There's not a way to separate that out. Like, we're always in a relationship for example, with our own sexuality.
Hmm.
Even somebody who identifies as asexual is still going to have a relationship with their sexuality. It looks like Nectua she says, a bit like your attention class. It could be like staking a claim. It's my life force, prana, chi, libido, charge, passion, etc. When you claim it and it's not just sexual, you have choices, including sublimation into creativity, etc. So many etceteras. And then a little wink and smile there. Yeah, agreed. I mean, that's just it. There are so many different options. And I think that one of the things that as magicians and really just as people in general that's really worth exploring is how do we take back the agency in our own lives? How do we take charge of something that is essential to who and what we are, instead of allowing it to continually define us? And because somebody else has decided to do that. Again, look at like why people have things set up. I mean, it's kind of the same thing with drinking. I used to drink alcohol. I don't drink anymore. Um, and one of the reasons that I got out of it is that I, again, had to kind of look at my own relationship with it, both from a generational perspective, because my dad was an alcoholic, but also from a perspective of like, how does this actually even make my body feel? It didn't make me feel good. And it's kind of the same thing that I found like with the experience of pornography. In the moment, there's the release. But afterwards, there's also just this feeling of emptiness and kind of like a draining of focus and awareness that just takes away from the sharpness of connection with one's life. So it's like, yeah, it is a lot like the attention class, the hidden harvest.
This actually kind of does segue into some of the myths. So we are on topic. Um, I think one of the really kind of interesting ones is, this idea that all spirits or entities are either good or evil. And, this is a very kind of religious, Abrahamic religious hangover that we've all got. But, it's like angels are good and demons are bad. And we kind of bring that religious split into working with our magical entities or into our, this kind of sex is good, this kind of sex is bad. Like, um, it really limits the depth and the complexity of the contact and our ability to be in relationship. Um, you know, I'm curious on your thoughts on that.
Mm. I think it really comes right down to the relationship that we form again with ourselves in this case, like with the sexual energies, but also like with the substance. Like it's possible, for example, to have a sacred relationship with alcohol.
Mhm.
It's possible to have a relationship with alcohol that is divine and honoring and everything else.
Oh, I have an example of that. I was working with a client once, and um, what we did is we created a ritual around specifically working with the spirit of agave from the tequila plant. Now, there was a little bit of like ritual imbibing of the tequila, but it was all framed around this very like ceremonial aspect, bringing in the protective qualities of the plant spirit and developing the relationship with that spirit. So it absolutely can be done. I think that's the really cool thing about being a magician is we have the power and the creativity and the community support to be playing with all of this whole breadth of human experience in kind of new and fun ways.
Right. Well, and so there's that aspect. And then it's like the same thing like with sexuality. It's possible sex doesn't have to just happen with somebody else. It could be, sex with yourself. It could be sex with a spirit. It could be all those things. So it's really just a question of where does it turn into the capacity for abuse? And it's not really even about shaming people, like, but it is like, well, let's explore our relationship. I mean, there's in my studies, one of the things that I found like around addiction is that addiction is essentially a replacement for relationship.
Mhm.
The idea being really that, okay, like there's some type of wound or some lack of integration here or something that's occurred. And so what we're doing is instead of seeking we're seeking addiction. And I've seen that. I mean, I've seen it in my own life. I've certainly seen it with other people. And I think, again, that's where the capacity for abuse comes into play. Well, when the addiction takes over, the addiction becomes its own entity, its own being, and that becomes more important than anything else. It's going to define every other interaction in your life. So I think it's really important to like have a conscious relationship with anything that we consume. And
Mhm.
that goes it's even something like as simple as food. Because a person can overeat and that can be a form of addiction, or they can choose to starve themselves and that can be a form of addiction. What kind of relationship do I have with what I'm eating? It could even be something as simple as water. Like, what kind of relationship do we have with water? Like, technically, you can't get addicted to water, and it's a really good idea to hydrate, but there's still often this unexamined relationship with what we imbibe or take part in our lives. And so, the idea of working with something very consciously is also an open invitation to getting curious about how that thing, whatever that thing is, shows up in our lives.
So what we're really kind of exploring, at least on that end of it, is a like a process or a way of being with consumption magic itself.
Yeah, consumption and creation. I mean, they go hand in hand.
Hmm.
Right now, we have a few people on here who are quote unquote consuming because they're watching our thing. Thank you very much. And anyone else who watches this later, it's the same thing. But it's what your relationship with that is, and how does it meaningfully contribute to your life? Consumption in and of itself is not a bad thing,
Mhm.
but and it's interesting. I kind of have a distinction I would make. I guess like video games is a great example of this. Recently I got into a conversation around video games, and one of the things that kind of came up with is, well, when I play a video game because it's my downtime and it's my way to relax and everything else, does that mean it's an addiction? Well, not necessarily. But I had to take a step back from playing video games for a while. I went through a period where I didn't like play them for I think like a half a year to a year. A long time anyway, because I realized that a lot of times that when I did play games, I was numbing out. I was using it as a way to escape from what I was feeling in my life. And so I
Mhm.
had to renegotiate that relationship and get back to a place where I could still play games, because I like playing games and I like them for the stories and things like that. But it was a really interesting point of clarification and realization around that. We've got another comment here. Noctu says the ritual magicians purposely identify as a smaller fractal of the greater fractal, a deity, etc., in order to be able to claim authority over these patterns of thought and emotions. That's a really interesting point. What do you think about that, Sheena?
My brain just went in like three different directions. Yeah, I think that is definitely like, I mean, like some of the sex magic that we have explored is like looking at different um kind of the smaller fractals of the feminine and exploring kind of them individually um through, you know, magical and sexual practice. And so yeah, absolutely that is something that we do. And I think that it's important to be able to look at I think really all comes down to the awareness of why we're doing something and what we're doing and what the role that we're playing in kind of that greater collective piece.
Yeah, I could see that. Nocto also said it's dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins that hook you. I mean, yeah, there's definitely the physiological component. It's actually one of the reasons I also ended up focusing on creating a purposeful relationship with neurotransmitters, which I've shared in Inner Alchemy of Life, and I've also taught a class on, because it's like, well, again, what kind of relationship do we have with the entities in our body, with the bacteria of our gut, with the the hormones and neurotransmitters that go through us? Like, those are entities in a very real sense, and we can choose to form purposeful relationships with them, or we can choose to let them kind of play a role where they're kind of calling the shots in our lives. And I mean, they're always going to be there. Like, it's always going to be part of things. But yeah, well, I'm glad you think it's cool. I mean, it's something I want to teach the class, the live class again at some point. Not to it's so you'll have to keep your eyes peeled for it, because we had a lot of fun with that. Almost a year and a half ago now. You were in it, Sheena.
Oops.
Yeah. Wow. Long time ago, it seems. But yeah, it was a good class. So one thing I want to kind of bring up, we'll keep talking here, but we do have a magical experiments challenge called Entity Crafts starting up on January 26th. And one of the things that we're going to be doing is exploring some of the, I'm going to post a link here to it in the chat. One of the things we're going to be doing is exploring some of these questions, and also just exploring some new practice, experimental practices with entities that we've been developing together, because magic continually evolves. That is a huge part of the magical practice, is the evolution of it. So that's one of the things that we're going to be exploring. It's going to be a 14-day live challenge with a Telegram group. We're going to have videos each day and things along those lines. Anything you want to add about that, Sheena?
I am super excited. I had been loving these challenges. I love the community. I love the daily sharing, and I feel like everyone just gets amplified, and our results get amplified because we're learning from each other. Um, so I hope everybody joins us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So where do we want to finish this conversation up? Where do we want to take this?
Hmm. Yeah. Noctua says contemporary society designs food, games, and media for maximum endorphins higher than exist in nature.
Yep. It's that whole addictive hook.
Yeah. And I think that that's like the really beautiful thing as magicians is because, we can look at it on a physiological layer, we can look at it in like a marketing layer or an economic layer, but with our ability to kind of peel back the curtain and look at what is going on energetically, what is going on um, kind of in the more unseen realms, what's going on just um, from that wider lens and how those mechanisms of control are affecting us so we can choose differently. And sometimes that is acknowledging that we are kind of in this collective soup together and having even just that awareness kind of makes it even more important that we're exploring these things together.
Agreed. Yeah, we definitely it's definitely an important aspect to this. And so I think, kind of where I want to take this as we wrap up is like, how do we find that necessary balance between the creative and the consumption?
Mhm.
There can be both. I don't think that getting rid of consumption is absolutely the answer because I don't think we can get rid of consumption. It's just a reality. And yet, I think at the same time, there's something to be said for saying, well, like, what kind of relationship do I want to have with it? And I'll use an example of this. I go to Kung Fu. In a very real sense, I'm paying to consume Kung Fu, to learn Kung Fu, but I'm also creating with that. So there is a balance there. And I think that's a really important component to why I do what I do. Um, Noctua says the self trust can be hard to find or develop. The messaging is so effective. Well, yeah, it is, and that's where the self trust practice. I think part of this is also about even forming a relationship with ourselves intentionally and consciously. So I think that's part of where we find that balance.
Yeah, I think you just said the keyword right there. It's conscious consumption, conscious awareness of what we're putting into the world. Um, I think to be to be a magician, we are students and practitioners of consciousness.
Yeah. Mm. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap up. So I'm thrilled that you and I have gotten back on to doing this. It's been a while since we've done one together live, and so it's
Mhm.
really good to be here with you. And thank you to those of you who showed up here and watched. We appreciate it. We'll definitely be doing some more of these on here. And yeah, if you're interested, check out the Entity Craft Challenge. It's starting on January 26th, and would love to see some of you fine folks there.
Excellent. Thank you all so much.